8.4, solving trig equations. So now we're going to move into solving trig equations, and we have some steps here for you to follow to help you through that. The first step is to get the trig ratio alone, and we're going to use that trig ratio to help us solve for the angle. So when you're solving for trig equations, you're solving for the angles that make that equation true. So you're going to get the trig ratio alone, and then you're thinking about what angle gives you this trig ratio. And a lot of times you're going to have two answers in this situation. You're going to use the chart. You have two ways to come up with the answer, using a chart or the calculator. The chart that we're talking about is the exact value chart. That's the blue box on that reference sheet, which is the table of exact values. And that table of exact values is talking about first quadrant angles, which are the reference angles that we use to find other angles. So that would be the pi over 6, pi over 4, pi over 3. It also includes our angles that lie on the axes, 0, pi over 2, pi, and 3 pi over 2. If the value is not in the chart, you're going to go ahead and use your calculator to find that reference angle. And you'll use the sine inverse, cosine inverse, and tangent inverse on your calculator to find the reference angle to use. If the ratio is negative, we want to plug in a positive value into our calculator. And the reason why that is because we want to make sure that we have that reference angle that's in the first quadrant, so that we can then find angles in any quadrant that we need to, depending on which trig ratio we're working with. And the third thing that we need to do is to determine which two quadrants that our answer is in. If we have two answers, if it lies on an axis, it'll be one answer. So you're going to think back to which quadrant trig ratios are positive and negative. In the first quadrant, all trig ratios are positive. In the second quadrant, sine is positive. Third quadrant, tangent's positive. And the fourth quadrant, cosine is positive. And you're going to be thinking back to that to answer these questions. Once you know the reference angle and you know which quadrants your solutions are in, then you're going to use these steps here to decide to find your actual solution. So if you're in the first quadrant, it's just going to be your reference angle. If you're in the second quadrant, it's going to be 180 minus your reference angle. If you're in the third quadrant, it's going to be 180 plus your reference angle. And in the fourth quadrant, it's going to be 360 minus your reference angle. So you're going to refer back to this to find your actual angles. That's going to give you your angle. So the three things you need to know your reference angle, you need to know your quadrants that you're finding your solutions in, and then you need to know how to find those solutions. Here's our table of exact values that we will refer to. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this and bring this along for some of our problems. We'll put this here. So the first thing when I'm doing these problems, there's a few things I want to look at just so I don't make mistakes. First thing is asking to solve for the angle in the range between 0 and 360, so one rotation around the circle. It also is giving my range in degrees, so that means my answer is going to be in degrees. So when I solve, my solutions will be in degrees, so my angles will be in degrees. That's how I'll answer it. So we're solving for an angle, and we want to know what angle gives us a sine ratio of negative 3, radical 3 over 2. And so when I look at this, my first step was to get the trig ratio by itself, which it is. So now I need to ask myself, is this value on my exact value table? So radical 3 over 2 does lie on the chart. So we can see here that if I go to sine radical 3 over 2, that's at a reference angle of pi over 3. Pi over 3 is 60 degrees. So what I'm thinking of here, my reference angle is going to be 60 degrees. This is negative, so I need to ask myself, which quadrant is sine negative in? Sine is negative in quadrant 3 and quadrant 4. So then I need to come up with my solutions. So I know I'm going to have two solutions. I'm going to have a quadrant 3 solution. My quadrant 3 solution is going to be 180 plus the reference angle. So it's going to be 240 degrees. And my quadrant 4 solution is going to be 360 degrees minus my reference angle, which was 60 degrees. So my solution will be 300 degrees. So my two solutions here are 240 degrees and 300 degrees. So if I take the sine of 240 degrees, I will get an answer of negative radical 3 over 2. If I take the sine of 300 degrees, I will get an answer of negative radical 3 over 2. All right, here for our, I'll just put this up in the corner in case we need it. So once again, what I look at, I'm looking at this. It says find an angle between 0 and 360, so one rotation around the unit circle or around the circle. And since my range is given in degrees, my answer will be in degrees. So my answer is going to be in degrees. That's really important. Our first step is to get our trig ratio by itself. So we're going to use our algebra skills, just like when we're solving a linear equation using the same sort of skills. I'm going to subtract 7 cotangent theta from both sides. So I end up with 8 cotangent theta minus 4 equals negative 9. Add 4 to both sides. 8 cotangent theta is equal to negative 5. And then I'm going to go ahead and divide by 8. So I get cotangent of theta is equal to negative 5/8. So the first thing I want to look at is the positive is 5/8. I'm kind of looking at the positive of that because in the exact value table, everything's positive. Do I have 5/8 on my exact value table? I don't. So at this point, I'm going to know that I'm going to use my calculator to find my solution. So this is not in the table. So we're going to use our calculator. The other thing you want to make sure of, since we want our answers in degrees and we're going to be finding angles, and we want to find we're looking for theta, and so we're finding an angle, we need to make sure that our calculator is in degree mode because our answer needs to be in degrees. So I'm just going to take a minute, go into the mode of my calculator. My calculator right now is set in radians, so I'm going to switch it over to degrees so that when I go in and find my angle, I will be able to find it in degrees. The next thing, since we're using our calculator, this is asking for the cotangent. We don't have a cotangent button on our calculator. We do have a tangent, so we're going to write this in terms of tangent so that I can use my calculator. So the tangent of a negative 8/5 is the same thing as the cotangent of theta is equal to negative 5/8. So now in my calculator, what I'm going to plug in, I'm going to plug in the tangent of theta, or actually tan inverse of positive 8/5. So we want to only put in the positive here. The reason why is because if I put in the negative, it's going to give me an angle where tan is negative, the first quadrant that it's negative. So it's going to give me a quadrant 2 angle. And then it's going to be hard to find the other quadrant that we have another negative tangent ratio. So we want to find that reference angle from the first quadrant. So we're going to plug in positive. You want to make sure you plug in the positive ratio. If I plug this into my calculator and I say second tan inverse 8 divided by 5. I'm going to get 57.99, so I'm going to go ahead and round that to 58 degrees. So that is my reference angle. So now we got to think back. We didn't use the chart in this case because it wasn't on the chart. So I'm going to now think about the things I need to know. My reference angle is equal to 58 degrees. I need to think, when is tangent negative? Tangent is negative in quadrant 2 and in quadrant 4. So that's where my solutions are going to lie. So now I can find my solutions. So what are my solutions? My quadrant 2 solution is going to be 180 minus the 58 degrees. So that's going to give me 122 degrees. There's my first solution. And my quadrant 4 solution is going to be 360 degrees minus my 58 degrees, which is going to give me 302 degrees. So there are my two solutions.